Okay, so we're here talking more about stuff. Let's talk about like why people would want this information. What's the benefit to them in terms of, I mean, they have all sorts of information on Facebook they willingly put up. There's all sorts of information on the web about people. What is this, why is this something they would do more than, any of the other kind of social networking things, which are mostly around entertainment and poking each other kind of thing, so to speak?
So I think one of the things that people will really start learning to come to 23andMe for is information about what's going on in genetics research, and that may seem kind of esoteric and out there, but nowadays places like the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times are picking up the big major genetic associations that are being published and writing about them.
Right.
And people might read those articles and say, well, what does this mean for me personally?
Right.
How can I relate this to my own genetics? And so that's really the connection that 23andMe is making for people. We're just connecting what's happening in the literature to their genetics.
Right. So, and tell me about why would people want to know about their genetics? Give me a benefit kind of thing that people would have.
So, well, they could learn, do they have increased risk for a particular disease because they have genetics that match an association that's been made in the literature? Or they might find out that their ancestors came from a different part of the world than they would have guessed. So they can learn. There's so much. Genetics is so rich, and there's so much to learn.
So I'd say we're at the early stages of this. So a lot of this information, it's information only. So you might find out that there was a study that shows some people don't metabolize caffeine as well, and therefore they shouldn't drink 3 cups of coffee.
I see. Okay, so it's useful.
It's information like that that's going to be useful. But again, a lot of it, we just want to stress, a lot of this is preliminary information, and part of the goal of 23andMe is really to do research.
Right.
So if we find out that there's markers associated with caffeine study, one of the things that we want to be able to do is then start asking people about caffeine intake and be able to form communities. There might be, a coffee lovers community, and we're able to look at various genotypes, look at various coffee consumption levels, and actually hopefully be able to do research and say, okay, we can actually confirm this finding, or we can say, oh, we've actually found other markers that correlate with caffeine metabolism.
So what do you do with that information then? If you find out, say, you stop taking coffee, or you that may be a problem for you?
Yeah, I mean, our 23andMe service is definitely not to be, you should not be taking action from the information.
Right, you're no doctors.
We're not doctors.
Consult your own physician.
Yes, you should consult your own physician. That said, our goal is that not necessarily now, but in the future, that this information will be actionable, and that if you find out that you're a poor metabolizer of caffeine, you should not drink 3 cups of coffee. You might just want to stick to that 1 cup of coffee. Or if you find out that you are an individual who is, has markers associated with Crohn's disease, you might actually want to go into a GI physician at the age of 40.
Right.
That there's different things that you might want to do. Again, we're not the medical experts on this, so this is the area that we'd want to really refer to physicians.
Diseases. Okay, so a lot of these have to do with diseases. You can't drink coffee, you don't like cucumbers, you're prone to obesity. What are the positive aspects? I mean, what can you find out about, like, what you share in common with people, or you're all from a certain town, or it's not all about diseases and horror shows. That's what
a lot of people are, they're going to find out this. They're going to look at their profiles and find out, gee, I'm not at increased risk. If anything, maybe I have a lower risk than average for a lot of these disease areas. So there is some assurance in that overall, a lot of people are pretty healthy, and this gives them that reassurance. That, but they'll continue to learn more as more and more information comes out. The fun thing is you can find out, like, your matrilineal line or your paternal line, where you came from and where your ancient ancestors originated from. And you can find out that your best friend has that same group that you're part of, and you guys might even want to form the start of a social network that brings people together of a certain background, whether whatever that might be. And
based on genetics, not based on that you might like each other.
Right. So if genetics becomes the basis to bring people together rather than kind of differentiate them, we think that's going to be really interesting.
We're all from the same seed, as you know.
Yes.
So
and you can also do the sibling comparison. So where your siblings can actually look at each other and see where are you identical, where you have similar. So you can imagine there's a lot of different fun things. Like if you look at, a lot of this is just a sort of fun self-experimentation where you say, oh, okay, these are genes associated with, bitter tasting. And you could say, okay, we're actually identical here, and that's why none of us like Brussels sprouts. So there's some of the fun things like that you can just look at. We have one area too that we almost call it sort of the grandparent feature, where grandparents can look at their grandchildren and actually see exactly which genes have been passed down to which
Huh,
grandchildren.
interesting.
So, so a lot of it are those sort of fun elements. We
Right.
feel like there's a really practical, useful element with some of the areas that you referred to before in the disease area,
Mhm.
where if you empower people to come together, if
Right.
a bunch of individuals have Crohn's and they all want to come together, that actually really becomes a powerful.
Right, which has happened on the internet already by itself, kind
Which
of
has
thing,
happened,
with
but
not a
not
lot of
actu-
information, it's just you already have the disease and then you.
But it's also not necessarily an area like that empowers groups to say we want to actually take charge of research and we want people
Right.
to come together and we want to try to further advance
Right.
those basic discoveries.
What about diseases that you might want to not want to know about? Like, I mean, there's a lot of countries about finding out about breast cancer, early breast cancer detection, Alzheimer's, the gene, that you might have
Yeah,
that.
there's
Are you
certainly-
providing those, or do you?
Well, it's up to the individual.
Right.
If they don't want to look into that information, that's their choice.
Right.
We just make it an option for people to learn
Right.
these
So how many
specific
genetic
things.
markers do they get? They get.
Over 580,000.
Right. So you're going to provide whatever they want, or the ones they
Well,
don't
they'll
want.
have the ability, if they want to look at every single data point. That,
Right.
they'll be able to look at sort of the raw data.
Right.
All the way through to, higher levels of interpretation that we provide.
Right,
So it
right.
runs the gamut from,
Right.
just raw data to.
Right. Right.
I mean, I
Right.
feel like if people want to get access to all their information, they should be able to get access to all their information.
Right.
The service offers them that ability. If you want to be able to look at, specific aspects of which research, a story comes out in the Wall Street Journal.
And then you're
you
going to
wanna
link it
see-
to stories
and then
too,
we link
right?
it to the stories.
And you have your own writers and talk about various.
Correct.
There's going to be
Yeah.
certain popular things, right? Certain things that everyone's into. Obesity, I would guess.
Yeah.
Breast cancer, Alzheimer's. There could be things that are much more popular than other areas.
Yeah, certainly
Yeah.
the more common diseases.
Right.
Yeah.
And not just that, just proclivity to this, proclivity to that kind of thing.
Right.
Interesting.